Rich rancher pretends to sleep to test the poor widow, and freezes seeing what she does. Winter 1887, Western Kansas. The wind outside howled like a wounded wolf, rattling the windows of the Harper ranch house. Snow blanketed the plains in a silent white sheet, muffling the world beneath its weight. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth of the study, throwing flickers of orange light across the leather-bound ledgers and heavy drapes. Silas Harper sat slouched in his high-backed chair, eyes closed, one hand resting limp over the armrest. He had loosened the collar of his shirt and let the fire burn low, allowing the weariness of the day to cloak him like a second skin. But he was not asleep, not really. He listened. He waited. Silas Harper, once the most envied man west of the Arkansas River, was now a shell of quiet calculation. His ranch sprawled over 5,000 acres, his cattle marked with the H brand grazed from horizon to horizon, but his house had grown colder with each passing year. Since the fever took his wife and daughter 3 winters ago, the walls had held nothing but silence. Then came the storm 2 weeks ago, and with it, a widow. May Whitlow had appeared like a ghost from the blizzard, clutching her 5-year-old son, Thomas, wrapped in wool and tears. Silas had found them huddled beside the barn, half frozen. She had refused charity, only asking for work. Something in her eyes, haunted, proud and tired, had made him grant it. He let her stay, on trial. But tonight, he would know for certain. He kept his breathing slow and even. The grandfather clock struck 11. Then, soft footsteps. They came hesitantly, just barely audible above the crackle of the fire. The study door creaked open. A pause. Then it closed gently again. Silas did not move. He could smell the faintest trace of lavender and cold wool. She was here. May's steps crossed the floor, careful not to disturb anything. Silas expected her to reach for the ledgers, perhaps glance through drawers, but she did not. Instead, he heard a second, smaller set of footsteps. "Mama," the little voice whispered. Silas's heart tightened. "Hush now," May murmured. "He's sleeping." There was the rustle of fabric as she knelt on the rug, just a few feet away from where Silas sat motionless. "Is he still sad, Mama?" May sighed. "Yes, baby, I think so." "Like Papa used to be?" There was a pause. "Yes. A different kind of sad, but it still lives in his eyes." Silas felt something shift inside him. Thomas spoke again. "He gave us firewood and food. Does that mean he's good?" May's answer came slow, thoughtful. "Yes, I believe so. A good man can still carry pain." Silas expected her to rise then, perhaps tuck the boy back to bed, but instead she whispered, "Let us pray." She took the boy's small hand and in a low, trembling voice began. "Dear Lord," she said, "thank you for this roof, for this warmth, and thank you for the man who gave it to us." Thomas echoed, "Thank you for Mr. Harper." May continued, her voice catching. "Please, if there is still kindness left in this world for him, help him find it. Let him know that he is not alone, even if he feels it. Help his heart to remember how to feel joy. He carries so much sorrow." Silas's throat closed, his hands curled slightly, instinctively, into the chair's worn leather. May's voice softened further. "And help me, Lord, to earn what we've been given, to never take more than we need. And if the day comes when we must leave, let us do so with heads held high, not as beggars, but with dignity." Thomas yawned. "Amen." May kissed his forehead. "Amen." Then, slowly, she stood. Silas heard her gather the boy into her arms. "Come on, sweetheart, time for bed." "Yes, Mama." The footsteps receded. The door clicked shut. Silas opened his eyes. The fire had dwindled to glowing coals. His face felt warm, but his chest was burning. He sat in the silence they left behind, and for the first time in years, he did not feel entirely alone. Harper Ranch, 5 days later. The night stretched long and quiet, each one colder than the last. But inside the study, the fire never died, and Silas Harper continued his silent vigil, pretending sleep beneath a wool blanket, collar loosened, eyes half-lidded under shadow. It became a ritual. Each night, somewhere between 10 and 11, the door would ease open, and the soft, deliberate steps of May Whitlow would cross the floor like the passing of a breeze. She never spoke to him directly, not once, but her hands said what her mouth never did. One night, she pulled the blanket higher over his chest with slow, reverent care, her fingers brushing his shirt. Another, she knelt by the hearth, coaxing the embers back to flame, her face glowing in its light. She placed a warm stone wrapped in cloth at his feet, whispered, "So you do not wake with frozen toes," and then tiptoed away. Silas stayed still, heart pounding harder each time. He began to wait for it, and then came the voices. Not hers, at first. "Mama," the little boy whispered from the hallway. May's voice answered, soft but firm. "Inside voice, Thomas. The house sleeps." "Is Mr. Harper still asleep in the big chair?" "I think so, baby." "Can I see him again?" "Only for a minute." The study door creaked once more, and Silas, careful not to react, kept his breathing measured. Thomas crept in, holding his mother's hand. He peered at Silas's face, then looked up at May. "Is he sad every day?" May nodded. "Yes, some sadness stays, even when people stop showing it." "Like Papa?" May hesitated. "Yes, your father had sadness too, but Mr. Harper's is quieter. He hides it deep, like a root under snow." Thomas looked back at Silas, thoughtful. "Does he have anyone left?" "No," May replied gently. "Not anymore." Silas felt her words like a weight on his chest. True, so painfully true. "Then who brings him warm soup?" "We do," she said, "because kindness does not wait to be asked. It is something you offer freely." "Even if he never smiles?" "Even then." Silas's eyes burned behind their lids. The next night it happened again, but this time May lingered after Thomas had gone. She stood in the shadows near the desk, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "I saw you today," she said softly, "out by the fence, mending it yourself. You have hired men who could do it faster, but you did not ask them." She knelt again, adjusted the blanket across his legs. "Maybe keeping your hands busy helps quiet your thoughts." Silas wanted to speak, to open his eyes, but something in him, pride, shame, fear, kept him still. May continued, her voice trembling. "I know what it is to miss someone so much you forget how to speak out loud. I talk to myself when no one's listening, too." She rose, brushing off her dress, and turned to go, then paused. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Carefully, she set it on the desk beside him. "I know you will find this," she whispered, "even if you pretend not to." Then she slipped out. Only when the door closed did Silas open his eyes. The firelight danced on the desk. With a shaking hand, he reached for the note. It read, "Mr. Harper, you may not see it yet, but I believe you are worthy of love again, even if you do not believe it yourself." He stared at the words for a long time. His hands tightened around the page. Then, slowly, he folded it and tucked it inside the cover of his old ledger. The fire crackled behind him, and for the first time in years, Silas Harper smiled, barely, but real. Silas sat at his desk long after the fire had died, staring into the shadows as if trying to summon ghosts. His ledger lay open, untouched, the numbers blurring on the page. In his hands he held the folded note May had left him the night before. He had read it more than once, 5 times, maybe 6, and still it struck like a stone to the chest. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, let himself remember. A summer afternoon, sunlight slanting through white curtains, laughter from the yard. His wife, Abigail, brushing flour from her hands, walking over to him while he sat at this very desk, frowning over cattle receipts. She leaned down and touched his forehead gently. "You will lose yourself in numbers, Silas," she had teased, her touch warm and familiar. "Come outside. Life's not in the ink." That was the last day she ever smiled. The fever came swiftly, took their daughter first. Abigail followed 3 days later, and just like that, the house had fallen silent. For 3 years he had buried every memory, sealing it in stone, until May Whitlow, with her trembling hands and quiet strength, had unknowingly shattered the silence. She had touched his forehead, just like Abigail had once done, not with pity, but with care. A small act, and yet it unraveled something inside him. He opened a drawer, pulled out a worn notebook with a cracked leather cover. Inside were pages of figures, prices, birth records for cattle. But at the very back, he found a blank page. His pencil hesitated, then began to move. She does not know. She thinks I am asleep when she speaks, when she prays. But her words stitch together the seams of something I thought had long torn apart. She does not know she is mending what I believed beyond repair. He paused, then added one final line. She does not know I smiled last night for the first time in 3 winters. The next morning, the knock at the study door startled him. "Come in," he said, expecting one of the ranch hands. Instead, Thomas entered, holding something behind his back. The boy's cheeks were pink from the cold, his blonde hair tousled, his boots too big for his feet. "I made you something," the boy said. Silas raised an eyebrow. "Did you now?" Thomas stepped forward, revealing a folded piece of paper covered in bright smudges of blue, yellow, and green. He placed it on the desk, proud as a prize rooster. Silas unfolded it. It was a drawing, crude but clear. A man with a big brown hat, standing beside a red barn. A little boy stood next to him, holding his hand. Both were smiling. In the sky, a yellow sun beamed down, and there were flowers. Above the scene, in blocky letters, "Mr. Silas, when he is happy." Silas stared at the drawing for a long moment, heart thudding. "Do you like it?" Thomas asked, suddenly uncertain. Silas looked up, voice rougher than he meant. "Yes, I do. Very much." Thomas grinned. "Mama says smiles are like lanterns. They don't chase away the dark, but they help you see where to go." Silas chuckled. A real sound. It startled them both. Thomas blinked, eyes wide. "You laughed." "I suppose I did," Silas replied, folding the drawing gently and placing it on his desk, like it was worth more than gold. "Can I tell Mama you liked it?" "Yes," Silas said. Then, softer, "And thank her for the lantern." The kitchen was dim that morning, lit only by the gray light seeping through frost-bitten windows. A pot of water sat untouched on the stove, steam rising lazily, and the smell of onions barely lingered in the air. Silence hung heavy. Silas had woken earlier than usual. A strange pull in his chest, not unlike a whisper, had urged him down the stairs. He passed through the parlor and study without much thought, but when he reached the kitchen, he stopped cold. May was on the floor. She was crumpled beside the stove, her body curled like a child's, one hand still gripping a wooden spoon. Her shawl had slipped from her shoulders, her face, so pale, so still, was slick with sweat. "May." Silas crossed the room in 3 long strides and dropped to his knees. Her skin was clammy, her lips cracked and colorless. Her eyes fluttered open for a brief second. "Thomas, the soup," she mumbled. Silas scooped her into his arms before she could say another word. "You are burning up," he said under his breath, voice low with urgency. "You should have said something." He turned toward the hallway and barked, "Lydia!" The older woman appeared moments later, wiping her hands on a cloth, her posture stiff as ever. Gray hair coiled tight at her nape, eyes sharp behind wire spectacles. "What is it?" she asked, and then her lips thinned as she took in the sight. "She collapsed," Silas said. "Where is Thomas?" "In the pantry, playing with the wooden crates. I kept him busy." Silas nodded. "Good. Send for Dr. Rourke. Now." "At this hour?" Lydia frowned. "Mr. Harper, she is a maid." "She is not just a maid," Silas growled, his voice louder than it had been in months. "Send for him." Lydia's eyes narrowed, but she turned to go. As Silas carried May upstairs, she stirred faintly in his arms. "I was going to make the broth. He likes it with carrots." "You should be in bed," he muttered. Her head lolled against his chest. "Please, do not send us away." Silas's breath caught. "What?" he asked, stopping halfway up the stairs. "Do not send me away. We will go if we must. Just give Thomas a warm place till spring." Her voice was barely a breath. Silas gritted his teeth against the pressure building in his throat. He climbed the rest of the stairs and laid her on the guest bed, the one that had once belonged to Abigail's sister when she visited in summers long ago. He pulled the covers over May's trembling frame and brushed the damp hair from her forehead. Downstairs, Lydia returned, her expression unreadable. "The boy's asleep," she said, "and Tom left for town. He will fetch the doctor." Silas turned to her, voice calm but cold. "I want hot water, blankets, broth, and I want you to show her the respect due any woman under this roof." Lydia lifted her chin. "With all due respect, Mr. Harper, your wife would not have allowed this." Silas met her gaze. "My wife is dead." The words were blunt, final, and for a long moment Lydia said nothing. Then she bowed her head slightly and left the room. Hours passed. The wind picked up again outside, rattling the windows. Silas sat beside May, a damp cloth in hand, wiping the fever from her brow, murmuring reassurances she could not hear. She twisted suddenly, whispering something. He leaned closer. "Please, do not. Let Thomas go to the orphan house." Silas choked. His throat burned. He blinked hard, but it was no use. The tears came, hot, silent, and unrelenting. He had not cried since the day he buried Abigail and their daughter, not when the fever took the breath from their lips, not when he stood at the graves, alone under a sky full of crows. But now, this woman, fragile and fierce, afraid not for herself but for her boy, broke something open inside him. "You are not going anywhere," he whispered, clutching her hand. "Neither of you. You are safe here." May did not respond, lost in fever dreams, but her fingers curled faintly around his. And Silas Harper wept beside her, as the storm outside howled into the dark. May stood quietly by the edge of the front porch, her coat wrapped tight around her thin frame. The morning frost clung to the railing like lace, and her breath curled into the air in pale, fleeting ghosts. A small leather satchel sat at her feet, tied shut with a frayed ribbon. Inside, 2 dresses, a brush, and Thomas's small wooden horse. She had waited until Silas rode out to check the northern fences, or so she thought. "You were just going to leave?" May froze. Silas's voice came from behind her, quiet but firm. He stepped out onto the porch, gloves in one hand, coat unbuttoned, eyes unreadable. His boots crunched softly on the old wood planks as he stopped a few feet away. "I thought it best," May said without turning. Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled on the strap of her bag. "After what happened, I do not want to be a burden, or a subject of gossip." Silas tilted his head. "You are neither." She finally faced him. Her cheeks were pale, but her eyes, those gray, storm-swept eyes, met his with quiet defiance. "They say things in town," she said. "About me, about you, that I'm using your grief, that I came here looking for comfort in a rich man's house." Silas's jaw clenched. "I do not give a damn what they say." "Well, I do," May replied, "because it will fall on Thomas one day, and I will not let my boy grow up under whispers." Silas took a slow step forward. "May," he said gently, "you do not need to earn your place here through work or pity, and you do not need to run just because people speak without knowing a thing." She shook her head, biting her lip. "You think I do not know what it looks like? A woman with nothing, taking shelter under a man's roof." "You are not under my roof," he interrupted. "You are beside me. That is different." May went still. Silence stretched between them, long and heavy. Then Silas spoke again, voice rough. "Stay. Not as a maid, not even as a guest. I want you here, as someone I trust, as the one person who made this house feel alive again. Help me run this place. Be its heart, not just its hands." May's eyes filled, but she blinked quickly and looked away. "You do not know what you are asking," she whispered. "I once gave my heart to a man who promised safety. He left me with debts and a child to feed. I lost everything: home, hope, trust." Silas stepped closer, but did not reach for her. "I am not asking for your heart, May," he said. "I am offering you a place where it can heal." She looked up then, tears brimming, but after a long moment she shook her head. "I cannot," she said, voice breaking. "Not yet. I am not ready to lose again." She picked up the satchel. Silas nodded slowly, pain flickering in his eyes, but he did not stop her. "All right," he said quietly. "But know this, you are not walking away from pity. You are walking away from a man who saw light in you when he had forgotten what it looked like." May hesitated at the steps. Then she turned, walked back inside, and closed the door behind her. The satchel remained on the porch. The sky cracked open with a roar, spilling rain in sheets as if the heavens themselves had shattered. For 2 days it had poured, soaking the plains, turning trails into rivers and rivers into wrath. But that morning, the creek behind Harper Ranch swelled past its banks, rising, raging, swallowing everything in its path. Silas stood at the edge of the barnyard, his coat soaked through, hat lost to the wind. Beyond the corral, the storage barn had already given way, logs torn apart, barrels of grain carried downstream like driftwood. "The fence is gone," one of the ranch hands yelled over the thunder. "The foals are trapped near the south meadow." Silas did not hesitate. He mounted the nearest gelding and spurred toward the meadow. Mud sprayed from hooves. Rain pelted his face like needles. He found them, 3 young horses, trembling near a half-flooded tree line. The makeshift rope fence meant to contain them had snapped. If they bolted, they would be lost to the water. Silas dismounted, ankle-deep in rushing current. With steady hands he began tying new lines to the oak trees, forcing the panicked animals back toward high ground. That was when he saw her. May. She came stumbling through the storm, skirts soaked, hair undone beneath her hood, Thomas wrapped against her chest in a shawl. Her eyes found Silas instantly. "What are you doing here?" he shouted. "You are out of your mind," she cried back. "The hill path collapsed. I had no choice but to cut through the riverbed. Get to the storm shelter, now. I will not leave you." Thomas stirred and whimpered, frightened by the chaos. May turned toward the east shed, the only dry place left standing. But just then, the current surged, tearing through the lower bank. A fence post flew past like a spear. Silas's heart dropped as May slipped, one knee sinking into the flood. "May!" he roared. She clutched Thomas tightly and scrambled to her feet. Eyes locked on Silas. "I am fine," she yelled. Silas finished the last knot, tied the rope around the final foal, then raced toward them. The shed loomed ahead, half buried in mud but still intact. He kicked open the door and helped her inside, heart pounding, hands shaking. The moment the latch clicked shut behind them, his knees gave way. He had not realized how close he had been to losing them both. May crouched by the wall, holding Thomas close. The boy was shivering, but safe. Silas dropped to the floor beside them, drenched, mud-streaked, wild-eyed. "You could have died," he said, voice raw. "Both of you." May looked at him, chest heaving, but said nothing. He reached forward and pulled them both into his arms, May, soaked and shivering, and Thomas, barely breathing, against her shoulder. He buried his face in her hair and whispered, "May, you are my family. Do you hear me?" She froze in his arms. "I thought I lost you," he continued, voice cracking. "And when I did, I realized I have nothing left without you two." May's breath caught. "You do not have to say that," she whispered. "Not because of fear. I say it because it is truth," he replied, pulling back just enough to look her in the eyes. "I have built barns and fences, counted cattle till my soul went numb, but nothing has meant more than seeing your face at the end of a long day." Thomas stirred in her lap and looked up. "Is Mr. Harper crying?" May brushed the wet hair from the boy's forehead, her own eyes shimmering. "Yes, darling, I believe he is." Silas laughed softly through a broken breath. Then he kissed May's forehead, held her tighter, and closed his eyes. Outside, the rain began to slow. The days after the flood were filled with hard work and soft silences. Fences had to be rebuilt, tools cleaned of mud, supplies taken stock of. But beneath the surface of every chore was the same quiet tension, as if the ranch itself was holding its breath. Word had reached town. And as word always did in places like this, it twisted and spread like smoke through dry grass. Silas Harper had taken a poor widow into his home. Silas Harper had been bewitched. Silas Harper had finally lost his mind to grief. May heard it first in whispers at the market, half smiles, half pity. Then, in the bakery, where conversation stopped when she entered. She had lived through worse, but now, she was not alone. And that made it different. That made it personal. Silas noticed it too. The way people paused longer when speaking his name. How Mr. Hensley from the bank greeted him with forced cheer. How Lydia, his oldest staff, began setting his breakfast without eye contact. It all pointed to the same poison. At the heart of it stood Mr. Everett Parker, wealthy, smooth-voiced, and petty as any man who had once been refused. Months before May ever set foot on Harperland, Parker had offered her marriage. Safety, in exchange for quiet obedience, she declined. He did not forget. And now, watching the town bend around Silas and May, he made sure his voice was always the one whispering loudest in the shadows. One evening, as the sky turned lavender over the hills, May sat on the back porch alone, her shawl wrapped tightly, her hands gripping the fabric like an anchor. Silas joined her without a word. Thomas was inside, fast asleep, a wooden horse tucked under his arm. "They are saying I bewitched you," May said after a long silence, "that I used your grief to climb where I had no right to reach." Silas stayed quiet, listening. "They say you were a fool to open your doors, that I've taken advantage of your kindness." She looked down at her lap. "They talk about you with pity now, Silas, about how you've gone soft, weak." He turned to her, voice low. "They have always feared what they do not understand." May shook her head, bitter. "But it is not just words. Parker spreads it to anyone who will listen. He tells people I was his to claim, that you only have me because he let me go." Silas's hands curled into fists, but his voice remained steady. "And do you believe any of it?" She hesitated, her breath hitching. "No," she said, "but it still hurts." Silas reached for her hands, gently prying them from the tight knot in her lap. He held them, rough calluses meeting soft scars. "Then let them say what they will," he said. "Let them whisper until their throats run dry." May blinked, tears rising but not yet falling. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about my past." Silas waited. "My husband's name was Franklin, a miner, a gambler. He was always chasing something, gold, promises, luck, and when he lost, it was always someone else who paid." She took a shaky breath. "The winter Thomas was too, Franklin left to chase one last scheme. He said he'd be back by Christmas." Her voice faltered. "But he never came. Just a letter, from a stranger, said he died in a fight over a debt, and that more men would come, looking to settle what he left behind." She looked at Silas, eyes raw. "I ran, with my son in my arms and frost in my bones. I never came here to steal anything. I came to survive." Silas did not speak for a long moment. Then softly, "I cannot replace the man you lost, May, and you cannot replace the ones I buried." He lifted her hand to his chest, placed it where his heartbeat lived. "But I can be the man who stays." May's lips trembled. "And if the world does not understand?" Silas leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "Then we build a world of our own." Spring came slowly to Kansas that year, unfolding like a cautious breath. The snow melted into soft mud, the fields turned green again, and the cottonwoods whispered gently in the wind. Calves were born, fences mended, and in the quiet moments between chores, laughter returned to the Harper Ranch. On a warm April morning,